can we do but get through? And we'll sing hallelujah, but what is that to you right now? But let's talk in a way that can give us some faith to go round.
Hello one and all, a very warm welcome to another instalment from the channel that is Jono's Graveyard Jaunts. Now before we get into today's video, I would like to give a shout out to another channel that produces some amazing videos on the paranormal, always filmed in beautiful locations throughout the UK. This lovely lady called Corinne, whose channel is entitled Are Ghosts Real, not only produces amazing video content in some incredible locations, but she's also a very beautiful soul inside and out. She does amazing work with a full-time day job, that of a cognitive behavioural therapist, i.e. CBT. She therefore helps people with their mental health issues, which, as we all know, is a massive problem at the moment and only getting far worse worldwide. I'll put a link to Corinne's channel in the description to this video, so please jump across and give this lady's channel a like, subscribe and comment. Thank you. In today's video, I'm once again in the stunning Peak District located in the picturesque county of Derbyshire, which lies in the East Midlands in the UK. Now the first map shows where the county of Derbyshire sits in relation to the UK, and the second map shows where Eyam, pronounced Eam, sits in relation to the county of Derbyshire and the Peak District itself. Now the village of Eyam in today's video will become known for a much more macabre reason. The village of Eyam lies between Buxton and Sheffield and is just north of Bakewell in the Peak District. Typically rural, most of its population were farmers, and in the early 1660s it did not stand apart from any of the other numerous villages that line the trade routes from London to the rest of England. And yet in 1665 Eyam became one of the most significant villages in England. Now 1665 to 6 was the first major epidemic of the plague to occur in England. The plague itself was known as the Black Death because most people who got it often had blackened tissue due to gangrene, hence the name Black Death. As was normal, the plague concentrated in London as the rich, including King Charles II, fled the capital to their country estates while the authorities did little. Left to fend for themselves, the poor and uneducated of London faced a merciless and terrifying foe. When the House of Lords finally met to discuss the crisis the following year, they decided, instead of relief measures and aid, that the policy of shutting up of infected individuals within their households would not only apply to persons of note, and that plague hospitals would not be built near to the homes of the nobility. The selfish and callous attitude added to the feeling of abandonment for many of the poor left in London. Now the movement of the rich alongside the normal trade patterns of England meant that the Great Plague spread quickly across the country, and rural areas that may previously have been safe from the disease of urban areas were also exposed. The plague arrived in Eyam in late August 1665. It came in a parcel of cloth and was sent from London to the village tailor Alexander Hadfield. When Hadfield's assistant George Vickers spread the cloth out by the fire to air it, he found it was infested with rat fleas. He died a few days later, with his burial being recorded in the Paris registers on the 7th of September 1665. Spread by infected fleas from small animals, the bacteria enters the skin through a flea bite and travels via the lymphatic system to a lymph node, causing it to swell. This causes characteristic buboes, which typically appear under the arm but could surface in the neck or the groin area also. Combined with the black bruising under the surface of the skin, fever, vomiting and spasms, the plague was a truly terrifying disease that spread with a startling ferocity. Now the local rector at the time, the Reverend William Mompesson, and his predecessor Thomas Stanley led a campaign to prevent the disease spreading outside the village to the surrounding area. This involved the people of the village remaining in the village and being supplied with necessary provisions by people outside. There is still on the outskirts of the village a location called the Boundary Stone, where traditionally money was placed in small holes for the provisions which those from the local area brought for the villagers. Now, as a direct result of this action, the disease did not spread, but almost a third of the villagers died. Now, interestingly, some of the villagers who were in contact with those who caught the plague did not catch it. This is because they had a particular chromosome which gave them protection. Now, this same chromosome has been shown to still exist in those who are direct descendants of those who survived the plague and who are still living in the village at this present time. Now, the action of the villagers in staying in the village is almost unique and makes the village the place of significance that it is. Now, we all know the nursery rhyme Ring a Ring of Roses, and it's associated with the plague. The ring itself referred to in the rhyme represents the mark on the cheek that those who caught the plague exhibited. A tissue we all fall down refers to the death of those who caught the plague. Now, the village of Eyam, whilst undoubtedly saving the lives of thousands in the surrounding area by using both containment and isolation in order to prevent further spread of the disease, in turn paid a high price. Percentage-wise, they suffered a higher death toll than that of London. Now, 260 Eyam villagers died over the 14 months of the plague out of a total population of 800. And 76 families were affected by the plague, many such as the Thorpe family were completely wiped out. Now, what we're looking at now, guys, is an enclosure, and it's got the Hancock family in. Now, they're called the Riley Graves because the actual farm they lived in was Riley's farm at the time. Now, Mrs. Hancock lost her 6 children and a husband within the space of 8 days, so that literally the whole family were wiped out, and that's why they're buried in this enclosure. It is private land, so I can't actually get access to it, but I'll get as close as I can, and I'll just try and zoom in on the sign so you can read that. So this is what's known as the Riley Graves, and it's at Riley Farm, and it's the Hancock family who were wiped out in 1666 due to the plague. So we're at what we call the Boundary Stone, and if I just pan to the left, this is where I've just walked from, which is the village of Eyam that was basically dominated by the plague in 65, 66. And then here's the Boundary Stone here. Now to the right, we have, overlooking this beautiful area here, Stony Middleton. So this, in essence, was the dividing line. Now, obviously, they wanted to try and keep the plague, let's say, in the village of Eyam. So what would happen is people from Stony Middleton would bring food and supplies here, and that was meant to be, and the residents who were obviously bereft with the plague were to give from Eyam, were to give money in exchange for that. But apparently the Duke of Devonshire stepped in, then the Earl of Devonshire, either the person who lives in Chatsworth House, the family, said, look, the residents of Eyam don't have to pay for anything. The least we can do is basically give them free food. So this would be a meeting point. Obviously, there's no physical contact here. The food was left by the residents of Stony Middleton. They in turn would leave. Then the residents of Eyam would collect the food. So there was no exchange of cash because of the intervention of the then Earl of Devonshire, now the Duke. But just look how remote this is. If I do a 360, you can see. I mean, it's still beautiful now. Can you imagine how it was in 1666? So this is the Boundary Stone. So we have on the right Stony Middleton, and on the left the Village of Eyam. So we're now in the Church of St Lawrence in the beautiful, picturesque village of Eyam in the Derbyshire Peak District. Now, this window was installed in 1985 and designed by Alfred Fisher. And as you can see, there are 3 segments to the window, and it just depicts really the arrival of the plague, and obviously the action that was taken by various people, William Mompesson and Thomas Stanley, to try and combat it. So what we'll do is we'll talk you through the various panels. So if we look at the bottom left hand corner, we've got the infected cloth arriving at the tailor's, wrapped in a bundle there. And if we then go to the middle window, we've got the ring of roses, which obviously the nursery rhyme comes from. Ring of roses, a tissue, we all fall down. And in the top left hand corner, we can see George Vickers, who was the tailor's assistant, and he was the first victim of the plague in him, and he died the 7th of September 1666. Now if we go to the middle panel, we've got the incumbent at the time of the plague, who was the Reverend William Mompesson. And if we look just below that, we've got the churches in the area, the local church of Stony Middleton, obviously the Church of Eyam there. And if we look on the top, if we look at the third window on the right hand side, at the top right hand corner, we can see William Mompesson, who was the incumbent at the time, along with the previous incumbent, Stanley. They were sitting around the table and devising a way to try and combat the plague, i.e. they decided that they've got to isolate the village, and self-sacrifice really for the greater good, which is incredible really. And then obviously if we look at the bottom right hand segment, we've got two lovers who are opposite sides of the quarantine zone, separated by a river. We've got Emmett Siddle and Roland Tor, and basically they used to meet, obviously, at opposite sides of the river because contact was not allowed. So the lessons learned then, doctors realised that the use of an enforced quarantine zone could limit or prevent the spread of disease. Now the use of quarantine zones are used in England to this day to contain the spread of diseases such as foot and mouth, and obviously more recently the COVID pandemic. It took longer for the ideas of quarantine to filter through to become common practice in hospitals, however. Now, Florence Nightingale pioneered the use of isolation wards to limit the spread of infectious diseases in hospitals during the Crimean War. And this is still used to this present day, with hospitals learning quickly that to contain the spread of diseases such as norovirus, isolation wards needed to be used. Other lessons were learnt from the method used at Eyam. Doctors began to use other practices to limit the risk of contamination. At Eyam, this was done by paying for food supplies by dropping coins into pots of vinegar or water, preventing the coins from being directly handed over. And this continues today with the use of sterilisation of equipment and medical clothing. Most recently, lessons learned from Eyam have been seen in handling the Ebola pandemic in Africa. The quick disposal of bodies close to the immediate area of death has limited the risk of spreading the disease also. I think the village of Eyam and the residents of Eyam stand alone basically in sacrificing themselves. Now, William Mompesson, who was the rector at the time, facilitated this, and he said, look, we've got to stay in the village, we don't want to spread the disease, which obviously caused a greater risk of infection to the inhabitants in the village, and obviously they paid a high death toll for it. But it is a tale of complete and utter selflessness, and it's fairly encapsulated and very eloquently put by the local historian William Ward, and I quote, "Let all who tread the green fields of Eyam remember with feelings of awe and veneration that beneath their feet repose the ashes of those moral heroes who with a sublime, heroic and unparalleled resolution gave up their lives, ye doomed themselves to pestilential death to save the surrounding country. Their self-sacrifice is unequalled in the annals of the world." And that concludes the video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment.